We need to rethink exactly how we do gardening. Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. We are taking a look at starting a few more items today and also just having a discussion about some ways that we can try to mitigate some of the food inflation that's occurring, and some thoughts that I've been having about the topic, and some things that I think will really help you as well. Well, these little babies are cute. We're gonna see how they perform. I think I need to perfect my tiny soil blocking skills just a bit, but I think it'll be enough to get us started. Here's the thing. You would really have to be not paying attention in order not to see the inflated food prices. We're seeing exorbitantly high gas prices, and all of that is going to be affecting people at some point. Even if you are not feeling a major pinch right now, it is something that is slated to continue to worsen, and eventually you're going to notice it hitting your budget. So we know these things, we could talk about it all day long, but really, what's the point if we can't come up with some type of solution? And that's what I want to talk about today. Some of the things that I'm trying to do that I think will be helpful in combating some of that food inflation, and hopefully inspire you to try some new things that I think could be helpful for you as well. We've already talked about gardening and the importance of gardening, and that is something that I believe we need to continue to work on perfecting, and something that needs to be done. Additionally, we need to rethink exactly how we do gardening. Do you think of gardening as a one and done, or do you think of it as something that you're continuing to work on? Well, we've gone ahead and moved this discussion indoors. It is windy and rainy outside, and so I went ahead and finished planting my lettuce, bok choy, a little cabbage, and decided to bring the conversation indoors. It just wasn't gonna work today to be outside. So I wanna talk a little bit about food inflation and some of the things that we can do to try and mitigate some of those costs. I read an article where farmers said that food will double in price by October. Now, when they say double in price, I don't know if that means double in price from last year's cost or double in price from what we're seeing right now. Either way, we are in for a big shock when it comes to our budget, because chances are pretty good, unless you're taking on a lot of side jobs, your income is not growing at the same rate as your outflow. And so therefore it makes it really challenging to try to stay on top of things and to stay ahead of what's going on, in addition to just trying to put a few things back to make sure that we have what we need during the winter time in case of storms or power outages or whatever might come during the winter that we should be prepared for. In previous videos, we've talked about going ahead and setting a few things aside in your pantry, trying to have a few canned goods, try and work on putting some staples up, making sure that you have some things that just some basic things that you're going to need in order to have an excellent working pantry as well as an extended pantry. And those are things we want to continue to do. We've also talked extensively about gardening, and I've seen that brought up as a solution in many different areas. And even if you aren't in a position where you can raise enough food to go ahead and can and put some away, anything that you can grow is going to help offset some of those costs, whether that's putting food in containers, planting food in raised beds in your backyard, converting some of your front yard into usable space. Whatever that might look like for you, any food that you can grow is going to help offset some of those costs. And then, of course, if you're fortunate enough to have a place where you can have a little bit larger garden, we want to try and work on planting enough that we can go ahead and put some of those things aside for the winter time, whether that's figuring out the proper way to store them, dehydrating or freezing items, canning things, going ahead and preserving some of that food so that we have it for later. And that's something that we will continue to talk about and give strategies for moving forward on this channel. But the other thing that I don't always hear discussed is how you can maximize your garden in order to have more fresh food, which will help you to offset some of those costs. So I think when it comes to gardening, we need to rethink things a little bit. It can't be the mindset of I'm going to plant one big garden and then that's it, I'm done. And sometimes I think that's the mindset that we get into, and that really is very limiting from your full potential. Now, everybody lives in a different place. Your climate's going to be different. So this might have to be tweaked, or it might apply to you a little bit differently, but I'm going to speak today from my experiences in gardening within the Pacific Northwest. One of the things that can really help, even if you have a small plot of land that you're working with or container gardens, is doing succession planting. If you're constantly thinking you're just going to do one big garden and then that's it, it's going to be one batch of produce and then whatever you've preserved, but you won't continue to have that supply, if that makes sense. If we start thinking in terms of how can we do some succession planting for some of those items that maybe could grow a little bit longer, it's going to extend out that season. Some items that work really well for succession planting here would be lettuce, because if you plant some every couple weeks, as you're using off the leaves of one, and when the head's kind of about ready to just be harvested, your new lettuce is coming on and you're going to continue to have that fresh supply of lettuce. Green beans is another thing that is great for succession planting. If you start some every couple of weeks, you're going to have a continuous supply of fresh green beans. This also can apply to peas, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, any of your brassicas, things that have a little shorter grow season. Any of these kinds of items can be grown in succession. So it requires a little bit of planning, because if you're wanting to can, you do need the bulk of your produce to come to maturity at around the same time so that you have enough to go ahead and put up. But if you can do some succession planting, you'll have your canning season or your preservation season, but then you'll continue to have fresh produce farther into the season. So I like to think about this to extend my season in both ways, having a few things coming on a little bit earlier, as well as having some things lasting a little bit longer. By doing succession planting, you're going to have fresh food for a longer duration of time. Succession planting is something that I think I was really mindful of when I lived in town and I had a smaller plot. I didn't have as much room to be able to grow big crops where I was going to have that abundance of produce at one time. And so because I was more in the mindset of having fresh eating, I was doing more succession planting because I just didn't have the space for it. But even if you are in a position where you have a larger garden area, this is still something that is going to be really beneficial for you and can extend out your season so that you can continue to have that fresh produce. The other thing that we don't hear as much about as I would expect is thinking about fall gardening. And, you know, a lot of times I think we get into the mindset of we're going to plant one garden in the summer and then that's going to be it. And I think depending on the type of gardening that you do or the location that you live in, some styles of gardening might lend themselves more readily to the idea of one big garden and then that's it. But if we can start to change some things or adjust our thinking, there are a lot of items that can be grown in the fall and some things that can even grow over into the winter. Now, I'm speaking from this particular area. And while we don't get the heat that occurs in other parts of the country, there are some advantages to that because the climate is a bit more temperate. We don't have hard, cold winters very frequently, and it's not something that will last for weeks and months on end. And so that does open us up to have a lot more options when it comes to fall and winter gardening. So again, you have to investigate where you're at and what your season looks like. But my guess is even if you can't do items that are going to last throughout the winter and give you that early spring harvest, there's probably something that you can plant that will get you food in the fall. And so look at what might be great for your area. For us, going ahead and planting some of those brassicas like cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, planting more lettuce, beets are great fall items. There are a lot of fall crops that you can go ahead and put in that will extend that season farther. And then some of the items can actually overwinter, like the purple sprouting broccoli. It looks terrible during the winter time. The plants kind of look all beat up and you start wondering, is that even gonna do anything? Should I pull it up and put it in the compost? And then about the time that you're thinking, it's not looking great, the weather starts to turn a little bit, and before you know it, you've got fresh broccoli. And we've had broccoli really early in the season just because that was able to overwinter. But we had to start it with that fall and winter gardening in mind. So look at your area, look at your climate, see if there's something you can go ahead and do that might extend out your season. And then also think about what type of greenhouse could you maybe use, or if you have raised beds, is there something that you could maybe add to your beds to create a little bit more of a micro environment that could extend out your season. I've done little mini hoop huts that I was able to use in my backyard garden, and that would help extend out into later in the fall, even close to early winter, depending on what I had going on. And it would help protect from frost and some of those things that will take out some of your crops. And so just looking at some options for how you might be able to navigate the climate where you're at could give you more possibilities. I think this year more than ever, we've really got to look for ways to try and extend that season, do the succession planting, because we can't just have a one and done mindset. And along that line, if you've been putting off gardening because you were thinking, oh, I just don't have time for it, or I'll get started with it next year, this really does need to be the time that you get started with your garden. Whether that's putting some things into pots or just trying your hand at a few items in a raised bed, give some things a try now. If you wait until you really need that food, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because it doesn't matter how many years you've been gardening, there's always more to learn every year, and something strange is going to come up, whether it's a new and unusual bug that you haven't had problems with in the past, or the weather is different than it's ever been before, and that changes how the plants are growing and how they are responding to things that you might have had really good success with in the past. So there is a lot to learn, and if you've been putting off gardening until you really need it, it has the potential to be discouraging and to cause you to put a lot of undue pressure on yourself just because you're gonna feel that need right now. Whereas if you can build up some of those skills, it's really going to help you. So I hope today's video gave you some things to think about. Start looking at succession planting, start thinking about some fall and winter gardening, and this could really be an essential part of your plan for trying to mitigate some of that food inflation that we're going to see. If today's video was helpful, don't forget to click like, and I would love to hear in the comments below, what are some other maybe different things that you're thinking about that could help to mitigate some of that food inflation. We know it's bad, we know it's continuing to get worse, but let's give each other some ideas on ways that we could maybe help combat that so that we can successfully navigate this time together. Don't forget to subscribe. We would love to have you be part of our community here at Blooming Wildwood Homestead. Until next time, bye everyone.